Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Miuch and you are watching A News. Here are the headlines. World leaders condemn missile attack on Ukraine's Sumy, which killed at least 34 people on Palm Sunday. Russia also strikes Odessa and Zaporizhia. EU foreign ministers meet in Luxembourg to discuss Ukraine and the Middle East. New tariffs on semiconductor chips coming soon, according to Donald Trump. Thank you for tuning in. At least 8 people were injured in a Russian drone attack Sunday night on the Black Sea port city of Odessa, Ukrainian officials say. Authorities say several homes, a medical facility and a warehouse were damaged, as well as a major roadway. Firefighters worked to put out a huge blaze burning on top of a building in the city. Overnight, Russian strikes also ignited a fire at a petrol station in Zaporizhia. Several Ukrainian cities have declared a 3-day mourning following missile strikes on Sumy that killed 34 people and injured 117. The attack on Palm Sunday is the deadliest strike on Ukraine this year, according to officials. Leaders from around the world condemned the attack, while Russia maintained it only strikes military targets.
Ukrainian officials confirm 34 people were killed and 117 others were wounded when 2 Russian ballistic missiles struck the city of Sumy on Sunday morning in the northeast of Ukraine. The strike happened on Palm Sunday, targeting the city centre. One struck a university building, while the second exploded in a nearby street. Footage released by Sumy's regional military administration shows fires consuming vehicles and bodies of the dead and wounded scattered in the streets. President Volodymyr Zelensky demanded a tough international response against Moscow.
The attack hit the center of the city on Palm Sunday. Only filthy scoundrels can act like this. Plus, wars end only when criminal wars are not forgotten and when there is a pressure on the aggressor. This is not happening now. Last Friday, 1 month had passed since Russia rejected the American proposal of a full, unconditional ceasefire. They feel no fear, and that's why there are missiles. That's why there are 100 combat drones each night, most of them Shaheds.
Western leaders responded swiftly. On social media, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the strike barbaric. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also expressed their solidarity. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer mentioned on X that Putin must now agree to a full and immediate ceasefire without conditions. US President Donald Trump called it a terrible mistake. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says he's deeply alarmed and shocked, condemning the act of targeting civilians, which is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Guterres says there needs to be a lasting ceasefire that upholds Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. The Kremlin, when asked about the attack, said that Russia only strikes military or military-related targets. Ukrainian cities have declared a 3-day mourning for the victims. Flags will be lowered and all entertainment events have been cancelled as a mark of respect.
The EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas called for maximum pressure on Russia following the deadly missile strike on Sumy that killed 34 people. Kallas spoke at the European Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Luxembourg, where ministers were discussing a €5 billion worth plan to send 2 million artillery rounds to Ukraine this year. The Middle East was also on the agenda, with the EU preparing to boost its financial aid to the Palestinian Authority with a €1.6 billion support package over 3 years linked to governance reforms. US President Donald Trump said Chinese-made smartphones and other electronics will not be exempt from tariffs, adding they're simply moving into a different levy bucket. This follows Friday's announcement that some of these products would be exempt of the tariffs of up to 145%. China has since called on Trump to completely cancel his tariffs regime. However, U.S. officials said on Sunday that products would be subject to a semiconductor tariff instead, with Trump expected to reveal more details later. The news of a temporary exemption of electronics from the steep U.S. tariffs prompted Asian markets to rise Monday morning. However, gains were capped as Donald Trump warned levies were still likely. Our Manur Magdum reports from Beijing.
Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index jumped 2.4% today, driven by investor optimism after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a temporary exemption of high import tariffs on certain electronic products, including smartphones and laptops. The move sparked a rally in tech-related stocks. BYD Electronics, a key assembler of iPad, gained nearly 2%. Lenovo's Hong Kong-listed shares soared 8.6%. Despite the upbeat market response, President Trump emphasized that the exemptions are temporary and part of a broader national security review. This statement underscores that while the exemptions may provide short-term relief, tensions between US and China remain unresolved. The market welcomed the policy shift. However, analysts warn that market uncertainty may continue as the geopolitical landscape continues to evolve. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing, China.
President Xi Jinping called for stronger ties with Vietnam on trade and supply chains amid disruptions caused by U.S. tariffs. Xi kicked off his Southeast Asian tour in Hanoi, where dozens of agreements were signed. He is set to continue his trip this week by visiting Malaysia and Cambodia.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has begun a high-stakes diplomatic tour in Vietnam, aiming to secure new trade footholds amid mounting tariff tensions with the United States. Xi's arrival in Hanoi marks the first leg of a Southeast Asia trip that includes Malaysia and Cambodia, countries that, like China, are under growing pressure from Washington's protectionist trade stance. Beijing is now grappling with a 145% tariff hike from the US, while Vietnam is negotiating to reduce a looming 46% tariff on its own exports. With supply chains in flux, Xi is seeking deeper regional alliances, and Vietnam is key. On Monday, the two nations signed dozens of cooperation agreements covering production, supply chains, and rail infrastructure. While the deals reflect strategic alignment, financial specifics remain vague. Vietnam, a major export hub to the US, is walking a tightrope, tightening trade controls with China to avoid accusations of tariff circumvention, while also maintaining close economic ties with Beijing. Amid all this, China is pushing for greater acceptance of its domestic aircraft. Vietjet has signed a memorandum with China's COMAC to potentially lease C909 planes, an effort to break into foreign markets. Despite these efforts to deepen ties, challenges persist. Vietnam has recently imposed anti-dumping duties, measures used to protect local industries from unfairly cheap imports on several Chinese steel products. It has also ended a tax waiver on low-value parcels to curb the flow of cheap Chinese goods. Xi's visits to Malaysia and Cambodia later this week will continue China's push to expand regional trade partnerships amid shifting global dynamics.
Tensions are rising again between Algeria and France after a consular official was arrested in Paris under suspicion of involvement in the kidnapping of an Algerian influencer. Algiers has strongly protested the move, calling it politically motivated and a threat to recently renewed efforts to repair ties.
Algeria has strongly protested after French prosecutors placed one of its consular officials in pre-trial detention. He is suspected of being involved in the April 2024 kidnapping of an Algerian influencer in a suburb of Paris. The case has caused a new rift between France and Algeria, just as both sides were trying to improve relations. On Friday, French authorities charged 3 men, including the Algerian consular officer, over the kidnapping of Amir Boukous, known online as Amir DZ. Boukous is a TikTok influencer with over 1 million followers and a known critic of the Algerian government. He has lived in France since 2016 and was granted political asylum last year. His lawyer said Boukous was kidnapped in April but released the next day. French prosecutors say the suspects are being investigated for kidnapping, illegal detention, and links to a terrorist group. Algeria's foreign ministry reacted with anger. It said the arrest was made without following diplomatic procedures. Algeria called the arrest politically motivated and said it summoned the French ambassador to issue a strong protest. It also demanded the immediate release of the consular officer. The ministry warned that this incident could seriously harm relations with France. It said the move was no accident and accused France of trying to sabotage recent progress. That progress had come after a March 31st phone call between French President Emmanuel Macron and Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune. Both leaders had agreed to work on fixing ties. Just last week, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot visited Algeria and said he hoped for a new phase in relations.
Iran and the United States are set to continue their indirect talks over Tehran's nuclear program. Reportedly, the second round of talks will be held in Europe. Our Turaj Shiralidu brings more from Tehran.
Iran said on Monday that second round of negotiations between Iranian and US officials will once again be held indirectly and in a third country. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai told a weekly press conference here in Tehran that the talks will be held in a third country, but he did not name the country. Unconfirmed reports indicate that after European sides complained that they are sidelined in Iran-US relations, most probably the upcoming negotiations will be held in a European country. And once again, the report said that it will be most probably held in Italy, Rome. The spokesman also said that Mr. Araghchi is scheduled to visit Moscow in coming days before the talks resume, and said that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has informed his counterparts from regional countries about the discussions held last Saturday in Oman, Muscat, and that all those foreign officials have welcomed adoption of diplomacy in Iran-US relations. Behind me is the entrance to the former US Embassy in Tehran, which was taken over in 1979 by revolutionary students who were opposing the US-Iran relations under the monarchist regime of Shah. Now, it remains to be seen whether the negotiations which have just started between Iran and US will lead to reopening of such embassies in Tehran or in Washington, or that Iran and United States will continue the path of 47 years of enmity in which one side has branded the other one the Grey Satan, and the other one has labeled the other one as an axis of evil. Turaj Shiralidu, reporting for A News TV from US Embassy campus in Tehran.
A 6.4 magnitude earthquake has struck Tajikistan. According to the European Mediterranean Seismological Center, the quake struck around 6 a.m. local time at a depth of 16 kilometers. The epicenter was 156 kilometers northeast of the capital, Dushanbe. Earlier on Sunday, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake hit and destroyed dozens of houses. A drug smuggling attempt using a drone has been foiled at the Azerbaijani-Iranian border. Guards in the area say they saw the unmanned aircraft drop a package near the Lankaran section of the border last Tuesday, and that it then returned towards Iran. According to officials, 2 people have been detained and have admitted they were going to collect the package with 4.5 kilograms of marijuana. Authorities say both men have prior criminal records. Yerevan has said that the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace agreement is ready, but Baku insists it will only be signed if 2 demands are met: amending of Armenia's constitution and the dissolution of the Minsk group. Baku sees this as essential guarantees of long-term stability and recognition of its territorial integrity.
A critical juncture has been reached in efforts to finalize a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan confirmed during the Antalya Diplomacy Forum that a historic deal is ready, but implementation hinges on two key demands from Baku. One of Azerbaijan's conditions is the formal dissolution of the OSCE Minsk Group, a body long criticized in Baku as ineffective and irrelevant since the Second Karabakh War. The second demand of Baku involves amending Armenia's constitution to remove references to territorial claims over Karabakh. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan noted Yerevan wants to sign the peace agreement with Azerbaijan and the document to dissolve the Minsk Group on the same day.
They mentioned the dissolution of Minsk Group of OSCE. And our perception, our response is that we are completely ready to initiate the process of dissolution of Minsk Group of OSCE. If there is no conflict, then there is no need for this Minsk Group as well.
For Azerbaijan, these two steps are not symbolic. They're seen as guarantees that Yerevan will no longer challenge Azerbaijan's territorial integrity in the future on paper or in rhetoric.
Sırasında tabii ki en önemlisi Ermenistan'ın ana yasasında.
There are important issues that need to be resolved. The most critical of these is the presence of claims against Azerbaijan's territorial integrity in the Armenian constitution. As long as this continues, signing of a peace agreement is not possible. Amending Armenia's constitution is an indispensable condition.
Değişikliklerin edilmesi bu labüd şart.
Mirzoyan, however, argues that the peace document itself includes clear recognition of Azerbaijan's borders and sees no legal need for a constitutional amendment. But Baku remains firm. Officials have stated that signing such a deal without changing Armenia's constitution would undermine its legal force. Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov said that signing a peace agreement with Armenia without a constitutional amendment is illogical. No international agreement can contradict a country's fundamental law, its constitution.
We prepared and submitted the first draft of the peace agreement. Negotiations continued for nearly 2.5 years. A month ago, the sides reached consensus on the text. Now we expect the remaining political and legal obstacles to be addressed so that the signing can happen.
Another signal of confidence from Yerevan, Mirzoyan says Armenia would no longer need the EU monitoring mission after the deal is signed, suggesting trust in long-term stability.
European monitoring mission. The mandate of the mission is, in general, to support the normalization process, to support the stability along the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And as soon as we have a peace treaty entering into force, we won't be needing this monitoring anymore.
As Armenia edges toward peace with Azerbaijan, it is simultaneously advancing talks with Turkey, a country that has long tied its normalization efforts to Baku's interests. While progress has been made, including joint discussions on trade, energy, and infrastructure, some obstacles remain, such as delayed implementation of agreements on the opening of the border for third-party nationals and those holding diplomatic passports.
An agreement to open the border for third country nationals and also citizens of Armenia and Turkey who have diplomatic passports. This agreement is not still, unfortunately, being implemented.
With all clauses of the peace deal reportedly agreed upon, the final hurdle is political will and constitutional clarity. It seems that if Yerevan meets Baku's conditions, the South Caucasus could witness its most significant breakthrough in decades.
Turkey welcomes Azerbaijan's support in Syria's restoration, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan told reporters at the closing ceremony of the 4th Antalya Diplomacy Forum. According to Fidan, Azerbaijan is working with Turkey on supporting security, restoring infrastructure and the economy of Syria. He stressed that support provided by Azerbaijan is very valuable. Fidan also emphasized that Baku and Ankara have established professional cooperation at the level of government agencies. Turkey has thanked Azerbaijan for its strong backing in the race to host COP31. The show of support comes as both countries strengthen their climate cooperation. Turkish Minister of Ecology, Urban Planning and Climate Change Murat Kurum thanked Azerbaijan after meeting with COP29 President Muhtar Babayev at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. He said to discuss joint efforts on climate, environment and urban planning and praised Baku's backing of Ankara's COP31 candidacy. Joining us to briefly talk on Turkey's bid to host COP31 is former U.S. diplomat Matthew Bryza, coming to us from Istanbul. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. First off, do you think that Ankara could win the bid to become the host of COP31 with Australia also throwing its hat in the ring?
I don't know what the status of the negotiations are among the various COP parties, so there's no way to tell. What I can say, and Australia will obviously be a very strong bidder. But a disadvantage for Australia is that it's a major producer of coal as well as natural gas. And Turkey is not. In fact, if Turkey were to win the chairmanship of COP31, it would be the first country since COP26 that is not a major producer of oil and natural gas. And so I think that factor is seen as positive in the eyes of many people in the COP community.
What do you make of the country's green initiatives in the renewables sector, but also its work on energy efficiency? Could that boost Ankara's chances for a successful bid?
It sure could. Turkey has a very strong record on both of those things. It is now the fifth or sixth largest producer of renewable energy in Europe, and the 11th in the entire world. And it has ambitions, of course, to keep on expanding those targets. And then it is committed to being net zero in terms of carbon by 2053. So, and finally, something that people don't talk about very often, but the Turkish government, especially under the First Lady of Turkey, Emine Erdogan, has had a program to try to eliminate as much waste as possible. It's a Zifir campaign. So Turkey has very strong credentials, and now it has, in recent years, installed, in fact, beaten its targets by 2035 to install renewable energy paired with storage. So, yep, there's a good story for Turkey to tell.
Well, we'll see how the negotiations shake out. Thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us. Small and medium-sized business owners in Armenia have taken to the streets to protest new tax changes they believe will severely impact their businesses. The proposed increase in turnover tax, along with other provisions, has sparked concerns over higher costs and economic setbacks.
Small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in Armenia protested outside the government building against new tax legislation that will increase their tax burden. Over 2,300 signatures were collected to express their objections. The new changes include increasing turnover tax from 5% to 10% for commercial entities and from 3.5% to 7% for production sectors. Additionally, construction, real estate, legal, and accounting firms, as well as businesses exempt from VAT and income taxes, will not benefit from the new tax regime. This law will take effect on the 1st of July.
Today, people have come here from places like Gyumri, despite the snowstorm, leaving all their work behind. The biggest problem is the lack of dialogue. There is only monologue here. The government treat what they say as absolute truth and refuse to engage with the real sector. The authorities are only focused on increasing tax collection, ignoring issues like regional development, social problems, and poverty reduction. I understand that political promises are significant, and that's why the tax burden is increasing. But this is not the way to solve the issue. These measures will have the opposite effect.
The protesters have warned that the tax changes will increase the number of accountants in the shadow economy, raise accounting service costs, and create additional difficulties for entrepreneurs. They have demanded that the changes be postponed until January 2026 and called for a fairer approach to accountants' taxes. Small and medium-sized entrepreneurs plan larger protests if the government refuses dialogue. The protests highlight that the tax changes not only complicate business operations, but also hinder the country's economic development.
Now over to Afghanistan. The country is grappling with a growing urban crisis, as nearly 80% of Kabul residents live in inadequate housing, vulnerable to climate extremes and lacking basic services, according to the United Nations. Our Tamim Bahiz brings more from Kabul.
Nearly 80% of Kabul's residents live in informal or inadequate housing, according to the UN Habitat, which has raised concerns about the heightened risks these communities face from extreme weather and climate-related disasters. In a statement posted on X, UN Habitat highlighted that over 40% of Afghanistan's urban population is concentrated in Kabul, a figure that underscores the capital's significant housing and infrastructure deficits. Many of Kabul's informal settlements lack essential services and resilient infrastructure, leaving residents increasingly exposed to the impacts of climate change. The agency called for urgent, targeted climate interventions and greater international support to protect vulnerable communities in Afghanistan's rapidly expanding urban centers. Meanwhile, Afghanistan is seeking ways to improve the livelihoods of its citizens. The country's Minister of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock recently met with Uzbekistan's Minister of Water and Energy to discuss cooperation on irrigation development, water resource management and climate change. Uzbekistan, which is home to one of the largest irrigation systems in Central Asia, pledged support for modernizing Afghanistan's irrigation infrastructure, particularly through drip and rainwater irrigation technologies. However, after more than 4 decades of conflict, the scale of Afghanistan's needs remains immense. Rebuilding its agriculture sector and ensuring climate resilience will require sustained international cooperation, long-term investment, and a stable environment to protect, to implement, and maintain essential infrastructures. This is Tamim Bahiz in Kabul for A News.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned to A News.